You're listening to Human Factors Tech, the show that dives beneath the surface of enterprise transformation. Hosted by Degnan, each episode explores the hidden drivers behind real change, not just the how, but the why. Because in the world of big systems and bigger stakes, it's not just about the tech, it's about the people who make it work. This is Human Factors Tech.
Welcome back, everybody, to Human Factors Tech. This is Season 2, Episode 2. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in, and I want to take the time to thank everybody for the outpouring of interest and the comments around Episode 1 of this season. In case you haven't checked it out yet, it's all about AI and authenticity, and we did some interviews with Atlanta Tech Week participants, and it was just absolutely fantastic, and I had a great time. And the fact that we got to start off the season so strong is really exciting. Secondly, I want to remind everybody that I am currently doing interviews for Season 2. So we're interviewing tech leaders and tech innovators that have an interesting story behind why they got into doing what they do and what drives them. And if you are so kind to give us some time, I have a ton of these mugs that I would love to give away. So thank you guys for reaching out for that. Thirdly and finally, I want to talk a little bit about leadership today. Some people say that leaders are born. Some say that they are forged in the fires of adversity and maybe just their situation. And I have really been lucky to have some amazing leaders in my life, both who are formal leaders, people who are my bosses, my managers, but also people who I look up to and follow and just use as reference points. Today's guest is going to be an interesting mix of the two of them. So this is a guy that was a former client of mine, and he has recently written a book about leadership, but not in the sense that you would normally expect. He is talking about CIO leadership and why it's different from the typical C-suite leadership. I mean, it's no overstatement to say that in IT, when something goes wrong and you are the leader responsible, that the pressure comes down on you, and that creates an interesting dynamic. And in the vein, in the thematic of what got you here to this point in time is not going to get you to that next level, Mike's book is just a phenomenal read and a phenomenal set of lessons for anybody who is thinking about becoming a tech leader and or is currently a tech leader like a CIO. So before I get to the interview, I do want to thank Mike for his time. Mike Chachula is just a phenomenal leader, and I was really lucky that he said yes to coming on the show and talking with me a little bit about his book and his own personal leadership journey. So with that, I will turn it over to the interview, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, welcome to the show today, Michael Chachula. He is a seasoned technology executive, one that I've gotten the chance to work with, and he's also the author of the upcoming book, The Chachula Method, a compass for IT leadership in the real world. So what's great about Mike is that he's had a career spanning like CIO and CTO roles across industries like retail, hospitality, franchising, and what I love about Michael is that he brings this amazing pragmatic people-first approach to enterprise IT. And his new book really distills his ethos and his decades of experience into what are really amazing, actionable insights for tech leaders who are navigating the complexities of modern organizations. So welcome to Human Factors Tech, Michael.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Great to see you again as well.
Indeed.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's great to see that you've moved on to another great organization, Propelled Brands.
Yeah.
So one of the things that impressed me most when you and I, got a chance to meet initially was you've got a very defined point of view about, and there's a rationale to everything you do. So can you talk a little bit about what drives you, what drove you from your career, from fat brands to propelled brands, and then what underscores, why you wrote this book?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what drives me is I don't think people remember that enterprise IT is a framework. I think people believe that enterprise IT is an answer, and it's not an answer. It really is a framework that folks come in and out of and have to really take a look at what they're trying to support. And as you mentioned, I've worked in 5 industries. I've worked for numerous companies. And the reason I've easily moved between industries without really skipping a beat is around the idea I get it. I understand that enterprise IT is a framework, and what the real driver of enterprise IT is enablement of the business. So it doesn't matter if you're making battleships or baby carriages at the end of the day. If you understand that enterprise IT fits, it's when folks try to say, here's the definition of what enterprise IT is, and start laying out a tech stack of exactly what they've learned in their career, it sometimes misses the mark. And I believe that's what makes me so pragmatic is I say, I don't start with the tech, I start with the business. And I say, look, this technology has been in place for the business for a reason. But again, that reason was then. We then look at it through an enterprise lens of where are we now? And then you get very pragmatic about how you approach it. You look through the lens of how do we make it more, if it's working, how do we make it more secure? How do we make it more easy to use? How do we start looking down that line as opposed to rip it out and put in what you know? Yeah. And just on the opposite side, if it's not working for the business, yes, you make it secure, you make it more efficient, but at the same time, you have to make sure that the framework is built in a way that enables the business. And that's why I've been pragmatic and successful in my career.
So I want to touch on something you just mentioned. It was a really interesting caveat. You said, if it works, because one of the interesting elements about enterprise IT and IT leadership in particular is, whereas maybe a marketing executive or even a chief executive officer, when they come into their role, they can essentially clean house. They can bring in their own particular favorite people or the archetype of leader that they want. And the product that they manage is very much it's a fluid thing. With IT leadership, however, you're coming into something that's baked very heavily into the organization. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I'd love to kind of hear your perspective on how does that change the role of a leader? As you come into an organization, you've got legacy tech. Some things may work, some things don't, but help us ladder back to that nuance that you just mentioned about IT leadership.
Yeah. Before I do that, let's talk about your ethos for a minute, and actually the name of the podcast. When leaders reach back into the past and pull in people they know, they're solving for one of the things that they know they can control, and that's the human factor. So when you look at this entire thing and you talk about leadership, folks don't want to be looking over their shoulder, or they don't want to be looking, down the departments, whether or not people are doing their jobs. So what they do is they take out that level of risk and they say, look, I know that Jared has worked for me in the past. He's worked for me for 3 years in the past. I know exactly how he's going to show up. So they get rid of the human factor and they say, I'm not going to play the human factor. Now this allows me to turn my attention as a leader to what I need to look at. And that's the technology. Now, that doesn't mean that that's always a good idea. What that means is, hey, look, if I have a huge nut to crack here, right, and it is something that I can't spend the time training new people, this, that, and this, I will take a look to see where does it make sense for me to bring in someone who I know. Yeah. But in the meantime, when I come in and I do my first 90-day evaluation, I'm looking through the lens of the organization. I'm looking through the lens of the infrastructure. I'm looking through the lens of the vendor management. I'm looking through the lens of how we do demand management and how we actually prioritize the business needs. And I'm also looking at the maturity of how the business shows up in that technology journey. Are they folks that kind of dump and run? They just kind of go, I need this stuff, and they throw it at you and they kind of run away? Are they people heavily involved in what's happening? And you almost have to take that stock, because that also shows you as an IT leader, back to your original question, how do you need to show up? Do I need to put more emphasis on the demand planning side to say, look, I can't build something off of one line in an Excel spreadsheet. I just can't. And that's a lot of ways that people say, oh, here's our portfolio. When you start as a tech leader, you open up an Excel file. It says, need it, priority one. They're all priority ones. They all are critical. And you're sitting there looking at this thing going like, okay, first of all, I can't build anything off of this because it's not telling me what I need. So through that lens, one of the first things I do to continue on what I just said about the human factor, about looking at the maturity, is I take a look at this list and I say, okay, let's pause for a minute. Let's go back out to the business. And now let's do an outcome-based approach. What are the outcomes, the business outcomes you're trying to affect here? Because many times on that list, they'll name, oh, this technology. We're using this technology. We want to use this technology. And at the end of the day, folks don't realize they already have a completely proliferated IT environment with 3 or 4 technologies that they're using 30% of that all really do the same thing. Right. So it really is going in and doing that, I'll call it situational awareness, right, if you will, as a leader. But as the podcast says, right, it's the human factor that a lot of folks try to really squelch right away and say, hey, in the first couple of conversations with people, you're going to know whether or not, they're going to make it with the organization. And that's why some people bring in their own people. They don't have time to make those human adjustments that they need to, so.
Yeah. And so within the book, not
Mm-hmm.
only do you lay out a framework and some very specific milestones, tools,
Mm-hmm.
frameworks for the modern IT leader, you also have brought in 3 fictionalized CIO,
Mm-hmm.
CTOs. And I was struck in particular by the first story that you tell with
Mm-hmm.
B. And one of the interesting things that you talk about is the personalities that work under her.
Mm-hmm.
And when an IT leader comes into an organization, yes, absolutely, it's ideally you'd want to clean house, but there's a lot of legacy, not only tech, but knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And if you come in and you completely clean house, that's the very definition of brain drain,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
talk to us about what you have learned inheriting people in
Mm-hmm.
these types of organizations, folks that you may get along with, some that you might not get along with,
Mm-hmm.
but they hold the keys to a lot of the tech that might previously exist. So whether you like them or not, you got to work with them. So talk to me about some of those experiences that maybe you've had or some of the lessons that you try to impart in the book.
Yeah, well, you get into what the book really is saying, and the frameworks that are in there, quite honestly, even though they give you, a catalyst objective, let's say, that really is just spelling out exactly what you want done, and it gives you a step by step how to do it. It doesn't mean you take that and you put it into a spreadsheet and you track it. It's to give you the ability to have that be a natural discussion or a natural email or a natural setup, let's say, of a document or form. It's not made to be followed as if you print it off and you write in it and you do this. It's to train you for that to be a natural. And the same with you looking at performance or you looking at anything within the book as a framework is not made to be printed off and followed in that manner. It's made to train you to react that way. That's what it's made for. So in the book, I want to make sure. But back to your point, here's the true rationale. Why I wrote the book. The more and more that I went up the ladder and I got into leadership, I started to see this trend. And the trend was that I believe that, especially in technology, because technology is, to your point, it is very specific. Yeah. Technologies are built for purposeful use many times. It has a very specific use, this, that, and this. Yeah. So there's a lot of prescription that happens within technology. But what I started to see is that leaders forgot that we're farmers at the end of the day. We're not we're not architects, so to speak, all the time at our level, at a C level. We're farmers. What we farm is followership. That's the key. Leaders forget that, look, you could lead somebody over the hill, and that's great if you're in a military situation. But if you cannot inherently drive and inspire followership, you won't be a leader for long. And that's what the book really talks about. It talks about, look, you have to self-search yourself and say, How do I inspire these people to be followers? And never assume that when you take on a new role, that you know exactly what these people are going through. You don't. Many of the people, even in the book and even in my career, you'll tend to find haven't been given the proper personal development, haven't been given the proper, you know, even sit down and listen to. And the book talks about it. You know, you got to sit down and really effective listen to these folks, because you'll come to find that, you know, people will show up. And I'll tell you just one other quick story is, I actually had an employee back when I worked for a company, and you know, she was extremely emotional. She would explode in meetings. She would cry. She would, you know, no one wanted to work with her. So during a lottery of employees, you know, we had 5 teams, all did very similar things. They said, we got to shake up these teams because there's just a lot of camaraderie that was going awry. And, you know, they said, let's shake up these teams because some of the personalities weren't getting along in the teams. First person I picked was this lady, and people were shocked. And I had the first pick. I could have picked anybody on the team, and I picked her. And the reason I picked her is because I saw what I just said. I saw somebody who delivered probably some of the best product you've ever seen, but she wasn't given the chance because people first saw her through the emotion rather than seeing her talent. So what I said is let me listen to her story. And I sat down and listened to her story, and I found out that she had a lifetime of abuse. She had a lifetime of this, that, and this. So what I said to her, I said, look, as most companies, we have this counseling. Have you taken advantage of it? You've been here 13 years. And she said, no, I never. I got her set up. I made sure she went and saw the doctor. And by the end of the year, she was a #1 employee. #1. And all I did was listen. That's what the book is about.
Yeah,
Truthfully.
so it's interesting because, you know, if you're a fan of like leadership books, like a lot of us are, what you're talking about is not necessarily groundbreaking. However, I think you put your finger on something really interesting, which is it's not as pervasive in the IT space.
Yes.
I'm curious to hear your perspective on why that might be. Why is IT different than other parts of the organization in terms of self-reflection, empathy, and even emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think technology moves very, very quickly, first of all. You know, second of all, folks tend to believe leadership. When they think about leadership, what do they think of? Generals, they think of presidents, they think of, you know, that's what they think of, very authoritative figures. And you're successful when, you know, people, you know, look up to you as opposed to respect you, right? You could look up to a president, but you don't have to report to him. I'm talking to the president of the country or president, you know, of another company. You don't have to report to them. The idea is that you need to cultivate respect. It's not given. You know what I mean? You have to earn it. You have to go out there and you have to earn it. But that respect goes both ways. That collaboration, and that's another thing people forget. Collaboration is a two-way street. And a lot of times when people tell IT to collaborate, it means do what the business says. So for me, what I'm talking about is, especially in IT, it's because we are in a servant leadership role. So we have to show up very differently than someone who might be in accounting. They have a very transactional role. We have a very service-oriented role. And I think to the point that you're making around emotional intelligence is very, very important. Folks that normally go into technology are extremely analytical. They like order, right? They like process. That's, you know, plus many of them could speak many languages. They like the language thing, they like to figure things out, problem solve, and do that, this, that, and this. People that go into business, they like results. They like fighting for things. They like driving. They like the drive. They like the pressure. They like technology. People don't always like those things. Yes, we have deadlines and this, that, and this. So emotional intelligence has to show up differently. Emotional intelligence has to show up by the leaders having the empathy to understand why people are in technology. And a lot of times, we as leaders, we fail that. And I've seen it numerous times. We fail the empathy. What we say is, well, why did you do it that? You know, it becomes a very judgy type of situation. I could tell you exactly why they did it that way. That's who they are. I mean, if you didn't know that's who they were, what did you expect? I mean, what, are you going to beat a fish to climb a tree? It's not going to happen. You know what I mean? That's really, really what it is. And once you learn that, and in the book, this is what I talk about. Once you learn what not just motivates, you know, because I don't want to make it seem like it's that dramatic, right? Once you learn what motivates a person and you unlock that, a whole different person shows up. And it's not the different person that you're motivating. It's you as the leader shows up differently. That person's always been that person. But now you realize, holy crap, it was me. It was me. I've changed my motivation for that person. And that's what the book talks about is you want to motivate people. You first have to learn how to motivate yourself. And then you have to learn how to listen to other people. And that's how you motivate them. And that's what we lose sight of. It's that followership component. So that's what it is.
That's really interesting, Michael. So let's talk a little bit about, self-development. We all have our own tracks. If we're lucky, we know what our strengths are and we know what our weaknesses are. Talk to me a little bit about what do you think those critical tool sets and development areas are for the modern IT leader, something that they may not learn as they rise up the ranks in IT? Because as they say, what got you here is not necessarily going to get you to that next level. So maybe this is an opportunity for you to talk about, for someone who is aspiring to be a CIO or a CTO or a VP of IT, what tools do they need in their toolkit in order to get to the point that you're talking about?
I think one of the things they need is honesty, right? For themselves. And I've told many a leader, and even recently, that look, when your ambition exceeds your capability, you start to fail. So what you have to make sure is that you're capable at the same pace of your ambition. Now, I'm not saying not to be ambitious. What I'm saying is when you start making the moves that you need to make, because nothing's worse than advancing a person into a role they're not ready for. Because many times what that does is clips their wings. Yeah. And it puts them in a position where either they'll change careers, they get let go, and they don't perform. And it is quite it's quite a self-deprecating situation when you have to go in and say, look, I couldn't do it, and it is ego crushing. And then again, in the book, that's really what it looks at. It looks at, look, when you talk about technology, when you talk about the C-level, despite there being a lot of big egos, you have to understand that this isn't about ego. It's not. And if it is, and if you are leading from a place of, I know everything, I could tell you, you don't. Yeah. So what you have to do is you have to first understand, if you want to move up, first, what it takes to move up. And secondly, what's holding you back. And many times what's holding you back is your knowledge, could be your approach. It could be how you show up and how people think of you. For example, especially in technology, right? We tend to come off sometimes as being the smartest person in the room because we're talking about things that people don't understand. But the problem is we talk at them like they don't understand. So guess how you show up? You show up as this overconfident, conceited human being, rather than speaking it through the lens of an business outcome-based situation where it says, look, I know you guys are trying to increase leads, let's say, right? I heard you're trying to increase leads. I have a solution that does this, that, and this, and actually solves 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 of these outcomes, right? And I'm not telling them, oh, it's written in has JSON APIs, has this, I'm not saying any of that type of stuff. Nobody cares about the acronyms. All I'm saying is you're trying to get here, I can get you there. Does that make sense to them, right? It's having that idea. Leave all the ego aside. And look, most of the times when you're trying to climb the ladder, just realize this. Most of the people do not have the gray matter you have on the subject you're talking about. So you really need this. You really need to pull back the language into a language that they understand. And if you do not rehearse when you're going into an executive level, if you're trying to move up, if you don't sit down and rehearse and really talk, or even talk to if you have teenage kids, talk to your teenage kids. Because if they don't get it, no one else is going to get it in the room. Because that's sometimes the level of education is I could use my iPhone, and that's the level of education of my technology. So really, that's what I would tell folks. Drop the ego. I would say chase excellence, not perfection, because you'll beat yourself up. Yeah. At the same time, know what your limitations are, right? And don't let your limitations hold you back. Let them jettison you forward by overcoming those things and getting yourself trained. Get a mentor. Ask someone you know is better. And I would even say, if someone is criticizing you, sit down with that person and listen to them. See what they have to say, because it just might be a misunderstanding, or it really might be you're showing up that way. That would be my advice. And in the book, I do talk about several of those things. And as you get into a couple of the other stories, you'll find that there's some few people that needed a good talking to.
Yeah. So
Right.
let's go back to something you mentioned about servant leadership.
Mm-hmm.
In any normal enterprise IT environment,
Yeah.
you have one group of stakeholders. That
Mm-hmm.
is, the business, the quote unquote, the business. It's the enterprise
Mm-hmm.
business.
Yeah.
In your background, you've most recently dealt with a lot of franchise-based organizations. So
Yeah.
you're not only building and managing to the big C corporate enterprise, but you're also dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of smaller businesses
Mm-hmm.
whom you are a servant leader to, because it's either in a
Yes.
federated model or you've got a franchise fee.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about some of the lessons that you've learned because
Mm-hmm.
you've got so much muscle memory from these
Mm-hmm.
experiences. How does that inform the way that you bridge that IT business divide? Because it's a very big issue, and I've seen this across organizations big and small, where, to your point, the IT org, they're very smart people, they get it, they have to deal with exponential intricacies and details. You've got the business who are incentivized on outcomes. They
Mm-hmm.
are focused on leads. They're focused on sales. They're focused on cost cutting. When you put the two together, they're like oil and water sometimes. But I think what you've done really well is bring that empathy to the table. So I'd like for you to
Mm-hmm.
maybe talk a little bit about what are some of the things you've learned from that
Mm-hmm.
interplay.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The thing that I've learned, to be quite honest, is the power of diplomacy. And again, it goes back to my conversation around why sometimes IT and folks in IT, when you think about emotional intelligence, they struggle with this piece because they're analytical folks. And at the end of the day, when you look at what we have to show up as senior leaders in the C space, I'm not talking about every leader. I'm really talking about folks as they kind of cut their teeth as they move up. When you get to the C level, you didn't get to the C level by not being diplomatic. So take that with a grain of salt. But this is more for folks that are trying to learn and move forward. But really, it's around diplomacy, and you use the key word. It's empathy. So you also have to learn what drives people, and especially in the franchisee world, what I learned is you have different levels of maturity of what type of business people you're dealing with. You have some mom and pops that, Billy comes home on his bike from school, and guess what? He's working in the joint, right? Up to these very sophisticated, own hundreds of units, have their own full IT departments, full accounting departments, and some of them may make more money than the franchisor, to be quite honest with you, right? But you really have to understand that. And, in the book, Good to Great, they talked about understand to be understood, right? So you have to understand what the situation is and who you're talking to. And, I talk in my book about you really need to understand your audience. You really do. And there's tools in there for you to do so. And you really have to take a look and you have to say, all right, who am I speaking with? Am I speaking with the mom and pop, or am I speaking with the conglomerate? If you're speaking to the mom and pop, and let's say you're talking about, look, I need to increase this technology fee, or I need to roll out this new technology, and it's going to cost them thousands of dollars, that could mean that Billy doesn't go to college next semester. That's what it means. And that empathy you're talking about, you have to realize that's how they're hearing it. They're not hearing it from, hey, it's going to do all this great stuff. It's going to do that. No, this means they have to find different means, maybe even take out a loan to actually do what you're talking about. And to us, it's simple. We got thousands of locations. What's another, $2,000-$3,000 a year? Well, if someone who has a slim margin, it's a lot. And if that's their only livelihood, you have to remember that. The conglomerate, it's a different situation. The conglomerate, they're trying to maximize profitability. So they look at it through the same lens as the mom and pop. It just doesn't have the same effect. So you have a lot more people who might have their bonuses based on it, on profitability, who they'll have a very similar reaction, but for a very different reason. So that's why you need to know who you're speaking with. So you need to craft the message correctly. So the mom and pop, you need to say, look, if we're out this new technology, we're estimating it's going to increase your revenue by 4%. Or 5%. Oh, really? Okay, well, I'm making this much, 5%. That's 10 times what I need to pay for Billy. I got it. On the other side, I got 200 stores, 5%. Oh, I'm going to kill my bonus, right? I'm going to kill this. I got a board of directors. Oh man, done, right? So you just have to understand, and of course hypothetical, but you have to understand who you're dealing with. And regardless, even if you're dealing with franchisees, there's always an end customer. At the end of the day, you got to think supply chain. And this is why I'm saying we have to break the mold of IT folks just doing IT. And this includes at the executive table. And I would argue to any CEO listening to this, to any board of directors listening to this, I guarantee you having your head of IT or a senior level IT person sitting at the table makes you stronger. I am telling you, because we know things about what systems could do. We know near industry systems. We know so many things of how things are interlocked and work together that if we're an afterthought, you squelch creativity and innovation. And I think that happens significantly. So now, hey, we sit at the table. I I sit in the boardroom and talk to the board, So we have a great discussion on technology and how technology needs to show up. But again, I think the empathy that you talked about is very, very important. Knowing who you're speaking with and ensuring that you craft a message to where that resonates with that person. And I don't care if that's a franchisee, I don't care if that's a supplier, I don't care if it's a customer, I don't care if it's your employee. It's the same thing, regardless.
Awesome. So I want to be cognizant of time, but I
Yeah.
like to end the interview with always one question, which is, what are you working on right now? And I'm not
hmm
talking about work. I'm talking about yourself. As a
hmm
leader, as an IT executive, you've written this book about what others can work on. Now,
hmm
talk to us about what are you working on right now, and where is that next step for you in your professional development?
No, it's again another great question. For me, I think what I'm working on is how do I become uh, and this is going to sound just very, very dramatic and grandiose. How do I become a better human being? How do I leave the world? And this is what really pushed me to write the book. How do I leave the world better than how I found it for the next generation of folks? How do I inspire the next, great leader or great CIO? How do I be a better grandfather? How do I be a better, husband? What is it I need to do to, um, always work on myself to show up differently. Hey, look, I'm not I'm not a perfect person, nor would I ever claim to be. But how can I be the most excellent person in this skin and bones that I could be? And really, it's interesting and to overshare. I'm a cancer survivor, right? And I used to speak on the subject many years ago, and I had a lady come up to me who said, "Listen, I have a 7-year-old child, and she's terminally ill and she's in hospice and, she has, I think kidney cancer or whatever she had, and she's just not going to make it. And what am I going to do?" And I literally, sat next to her and just said, "Well, unfortunately, I don't think there's any words I could say to make it better. But here's what I will say. We have two choices. You could say goodbye or you could create a legacy. Which do you want to do?" The legacy is start a foundation. The legacy is make her voice and her life, despite being as short and limited as it was, profound. Make it live on forever because she deserved that, right? And she did. And I think and that was a moment, a gift to me, right? I might have given her hopefully something that resonated with her, but that gift was for me to be a better person. It wasn't for her to make her feel more comfortable, which of course it did, but it really was a gift given to me to have that opportunity. And that's the way you have to look at life. It's not because you're great. That's not what the world is about. It's about you making the world greater. I mean, it's ask not what the country can do for you, right? Ask what you could do for the country. And I would expel the same thing for the world, right? Don't ask what the universe can do for you. Ask what you could do for the universe. Be a better person, better dad, better human. That's really what I'm trying to work on, and I would inspire anyone else in the world within the voice to work on, to be honest.
Great. Well, Michael, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. And
Oh, great.
can you tell folks how to get your new book, The Chachula Method?
Yeah, sure. It's exclusive right now on Amazon, so just go on Amazon. Luckily, the last name is quite unique. So be different. It was called the Smith Method. I come up with millions of titles, but the Chachula Method, it's on sale in all formats. And I think you'll find it to be a fairly good read. And you'll probably have a couple chuckles, especially folks in IT, to be like, yep, I know that guy, So,
it is a great book, and I'm actually having a lot of fun reading it right now.
All right, Joe, it's great to see you, my friend.
Once again, I want to thank Mike Chachula for coming on the show, and do pick up his book. It really is a phenomenal read. I will just close with a little bit of reflection on my own leadership journey. Authenticity and empathy for other people is such a precious commodity for us, particularly when we are in high-performing jobs. We ultimately will get ourselves into situations where the pressure will be on. And nobody knows that more than CIOs and CTOs. So the question is, how can you always reach for your humanity? How can you develop continual empathy for other people? Ultimately, when you and I go to work, we bring all of the baggage that we've had for good and for bad to our working relationships. And Mike is just a really good example of somebody who carries with him this sense that where he is today is only as a direct result of the people who he works with and the people who have helped him get to that place in time. And I hope that all of us never forget that when we work with people, particularly folks who spend their days keeping tech up and running, folks who deal with the complexities of technology and systems integration, where one misplaced piece of code can have seismic impacts. I think that if we keep communication flowing, like Mike says, if we continue to develop empathy and understanding and continue on dialoguing with each other, I think the world and technology is ultimately going to be a much, much better place and a much better discipline. So that is it for us at Human Factors Tech for this episode. We're going to go on maybe a 1 to 2 week break for the 4th of July weekend. Happy Independence Day, everybody. And I hope that you take some time off, take care of yourself. And again, if you have any thoughts, please either leave them in the show notes, the reviews, or just email me at hello@humanfactorstech.com. So once again, my name is Jared Degnan. This has been Human Factors Tech. Stay human.
Thanks for listening to Human Factors Tech. If this conversation resonated with you, please follow, share, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And for more stories on the people powering enterprise transformation, visit humanfactorstech.com.